3 years after Lucas Blackwater destroyed their marriage by believing a carefully staged lie, he found Tiffany Campbell serving coffee with cracked hands, an empty wedding finger, and a kindness life had failed to take from her, forcing him to face the heartbreaking truth that the woman he punished had been innocent all along. Lucas Blackwater had built a life where almost nothing happened by accident. His meetings were planned, his flights were private, and even his meals appeared on schedule. Then, on a cold, rainy evening in Detroit, his car hit a pothole and blew a tire in a neighborhood he had not visited in years. While his driver worked outside, Lucas crossed the street and entered a small diner with a weak neon sign above the door. He wanted a cup of coffee and 10 quiet minutes before returning to a business deal worth hundreds of millions. Instead, he walked into the part of his past he had spent 3 years trying to bury. The diner was nearly empty. 2 truckers sat at the counter, and an elderly man was counting coins beside an unfinished plate of food. Lucas chose a booth near the window and reached for his phone, but the old man's voice stopped him. His card had been declined, and he was apologizing to the waitress as if being short a few dollars were a personal failure. The waitress looked toward the register, took money from her own apron, and placed it under the receipt before the man could protest. She told him the register had made a mistake, then packed the rest of his meal for him to take home. She did it quietly, protecting his pride as carefully as she paid his bill. Lucas recognized her before she turned around. He knew the slight tilt of her head, the calm voice she used when someone was embarrassed, and the way she made kindness look ordinary. When she lifted the coffee pot and faced him, both of them stopped moving. Tiffany Campbell stood only a few feet away, wearing a faded blue uniform and shoes worn thin at the edges. She looked smaller than he remembered, and exhaustion sat heavily beneath her eyes. Her hands hurt him most. They had once been soft and covered in bright paint from her art classes, but now they were red, dry, and cracked from cleaning chemicals and long shifts. For 3 years, Lucas had imagined this moment. He thought he would feel anger, satisfaction, or nothing at all. Instead, he felt as if someone had reached into his chest and pulled open a door he had locked long ago. Tiffany looked at his expensive suit, his watch, and the phone beside his hand, then quickly looked away. "I thought 3 years would make this easier," she said. Lucas answered before pride could stop him. "It didn't." For one brief second, her face softened, and he saw the woman who had once believed in him when he had nothing but an old laptop and an idea. Then she filled his cup and became a waitress again. "You still take it black?" she asked. Lucas nodded. "Some habits survive," she said, placing the pot back on the tray. He wanted to ask why she was working there, what had happened to her teaching career, and whether she still painted. But the questions felt wrong coming from him. He had not called when the divorce became final. He had not asked where she went or how she survived. He had accepted the story that she betrayed him because believing it had been easier than questioning his own choices. Lucas glanced toward the elderly customer. "You paid for his dinner." Tiffany's shoulders stiffened. He was hungry. Lucas looked at her uniform and the loose threads around her sleeve. "You don't seem like you have much to spare." She met his eyes then, and the tiredness in her face gave way to the fire he remembered. "Money isn't the only thing people can give, Lucas." He had no answer. In his world, every problem had a price, every mistake could be settled, and every loss could be measured. Tiffany had just spent part of her small paycheck so an old man would not go home ashamed. Mr. Harris raised his empty cup from the corner booth, and Tiffany turned to help him. As she moved away, a folded sheet of paper slipped from her apron and landed beside Lucas's shoe. He picked it up before she noticed. It was a child's drawing made with crayons. Tiffany stood in the middle of several children, holding their hands beneath a bright yellow sun. Behind them was a building with cracks in the walls, but flowers grew through every broken place. Across the top, a child had written, "Miss Tiff taught me that broken things can still become beautiful." Lucas read the words twice. When he looked up, Tiffany was standing in front of him with her hand extended. The sharp anger in her eyes was gone, replaced by something more guarded. "Give it back." Lucas held the paper carefully. "Who drew this?" She took it from him and folded it along the old lines. "Someone who needed to believe it." She pressed the drawing against her chest for a moment before returning it to her apron. That small movement affected Lucas more than anything she had said. Outside, his driver tapped on the window and pointed toward the repaired car. Lucas should have left, but he remained in the booth and watched Tiffany carry a paper bag to Mr. Harris. She slipped an extra piece of pie inside, then pretended not to notice when the old man wiped his eyes. Tiffany had less money, less rest, and far fewer choices than the woman Lucas had once known. Yet she was still giving away what little she had. He had spent 3 years telling himself she was selfish, dishonest, and responsible for the destruction of their marriage. Nothing he had seen inside the diner fit that story. Tiffany returned to the counter without looking at him again. Lucas stared at the untouched coffee in front of him while the rain struck the window. For the first time, he remembered how frightened she had looked on the morning he accused her, and how quickly he had decided that fear was guilt. A question rose in his mind, one he had refused to ask for 3 years. If Tiffany had truly betrayed him, why did she look like the person who had been punished? And if she had been telling the truth, then someone else had destroyed their marriage, and Lucas had helped them do it. Lucas should have left when his driver signaled that the car was ready, but he stayed in the booth with the child's drawing still on his mind. Tiffany moved behind the counter, refilling cups and carrying plates as though seeing him had changed nothing. But he noticed the way her hand shook when she set down the coffee pot and how she took one slow breath before turning back toward him. The question had been sitting inside him for 3 years, sharp and unfinished. He waited until she returned to his table, then asked it in the calm voice he used during difficult business meetings. "What happened to Rocco?" Tiffany stopped so suddenly that coffee moved against the rim of the pot. For a moment, she said nothing. She looked at Lucas with the tired expression of someone who had answered the same accusation too many times and knew the answer would not matter. "You still say his name like repeating the lie will somehow make it true," she said. Lucas kept his voice low because the diner had grown quiet around them. "I saw enough to know what happened." Tiffany placed the coffee pot on the table before her grip could tighten around it. "No, Lucas, you saw enough to confirm what you were already afraid of." The words landed harder than if she had shouted. Lucas leaned back, trying to hold on to the certainty that had protected him for 3 years. He reminded her about the photographs, the hotel records, the messages, and the people who claimed they had seen her with Rocco before the gala. Tiffany listened without interrupting, but her face slowly changed from anger to something more painful. "I woke up in our bed with pieces of the night missing," she said. "My dress was on the floor. My head felt like it had been split open, and there was a man in those pictures I barely remembered meeting." She looked directly at Lucas. "I told you I thought someone put something in my drink. You looked at me like I was trying to escape punishment." Lucas remembered that morning more clearly than he wanted to. Tiffany had been confused, crying, and unable to explain the gaps in her memory. At the time, he had believed her confusion was guilt, because that explanation hurt less than wondering whether someone had harmed her under his own roof. "You apologized," he said. "You told me you remembered kissing him." Tiffany's eyes filled, but she did not look away. "I apologized for the one moment I could remember, because I refused to lie to you even when the truth made me look guilty. I never said I had an affair." She paused, swallowing hard. "You filled in everything I couldn't remember, and then you punished me for the story you created." The diner was silent now, except for the soft sound of rain against the windows. Lucas looked down at his coffee because he could no longer meet her eyes. Tiffany told him the messages had never appeared on her phone, even though the screenshots showed her number. She had asked him to check the devices, question the witnesses, and investigate who had access to their home, but he had already hired lawyers. "I loved you before the company, before the penthouse, before anyone knew your name," she said. "But when strangers handed you a few screenshots, you trusted them more than the woman who slept beside you for 7 years." Lucas felt shame rise in his throat, but pride still pushed him to defend himself. The evidence looked real. Tiffany gave a tired nod. That was the point. She picked up the coffee pot and turned away, ending the conversation before Lucas could find another answer. He watched her return to work, smiling at customers even though the smile never reached her eyes. The $1,000 bill in his wallet suddenly felt heavy. He did not know how to apologize, and he was not ready to admit that she might be right, so he reached for the one thing that had solved almost every other problem in his life. He placed the bill under the coffee cup and stood. It was not meant as an insult. In his mind, it was help, an apology, and proof that he had noticed how hard her life had become. He had almost reached the door when Tiffany called his name. She came toward him, holding the bill between 2 fingers, as though it were something she did not want touching her skin. "My coffee costs $5, she said. Lucas glanced at the bill. "Keep the rest." Her face tightened. "I serve meals, Lucas. I do not sell my dignity." He lowered his voice. "I was trying to help." Tiffany stepped closer and pushed the money against his chest. "Then you should have helped 3 years ago, when all I needed was for my husband to believe me." Lucas stood frozen, the bill trapped between them. Tiffany's anger was not loud, but the whole diner could feel it. "You don't get to look at my uniform, decide my life is sad, and throw money at me so you can leave feeling like a good man," she said. "You had a chance to help when my name was being destroyed. You had a chance when I was begging you to ask one more question. You chose not to." Lucas opened his mouth, but no words came. Tiffany took his wallet from his open hand, removed a single $5 bill, and placed the wallet and the $1,000 back against his chest. "That pays for the coffee. We are even." They both knew they were not even. No amount of money could return 3 lost years, repair her career, or erase the morning he had looked at her as if she were a stranger. Tiffany turned and walked back toward the counter without waiting for an apology. Lucas stepped outside into the rain, but the driver's open umbrella did not protect him from the weight of what she had said. Before the diner door closed behind him, he heard the cook speak quietly to Tiffany. "You sure you have enough left for the cleaning shift tonight?" There was a short pause before Tiffany answered. "Strength isn't something I have," she said. "It's something I borrow until morning." Lucas stopped beneath the diner's flickering sign. Through the wet glass, he watched Tiffany tie her apron tighter and lift another heavy tray. She had just refused enough money to pay months of rent, then returned to work as if her heart had not been opened in front of a room full of strangers. Lucas had once believed that losing him was the consequence of her betrayal. Now, for the first time, he wondered whether her suffering was not proof of guilt at all. Maybe it was proof of what his doubt had done to an innocent woman. Lucas sat in the back seat while rain moved in thin lines across the window. His driver waited for an address, but Lucas kept watching the diner. Nearly 20 minutes passed before Tiffany finally stepped outside, wearing a cheap black coat over her uniform. She did not walk toward a car or call for a ride. She crossed the street, stood beneath a broken bus shelter, and rubbed her hands together against the cold. When a crowded city bus arrived, she climbed aboard and disappeared behind the fogged glass. Lucas heard himself say, "Follow the bus, but stay far enough back that she won't see us." His driver looked at him in the mirror, but did not ask questions. Lucas knew following Tiffany was wrong, yet he could not return to his penthouse and pretend the evening had meant nothing. The bus traveled from the worn industrial neighborhood into downtown Detroit, passing bright restaurants and glass towers filled with people who knew Lucas's name. Tiffany got off near one of those towers and entered through a side door used by maintenance workers. A few minutes later, Lucas saw her through the lobby windows wearing gray work pants and a janitorial shirt. She tied a plastic bag around her diner shoes to protect them from cleaning water. Then she pushed a supply cart toward the elevators. Lucas entered through the main lobby after asking his driver to wait outside. The security guard recognized him and immediately straightened, but Lucas raised a finger to keep the man quiet. He took a private elevator to the executive floors and stepped out near a dark conference room. Through the glass wall, he saw Tiffany emptying trash cans and wiping fingerprints from a polished table. Framed paintings hung along the hallway, including work by artists who had once attended Tiffany's exhibitions and praised her talent. Years ago, she had stood in rooms like this, wearing paint on her hands while wealthy collectors waited to speak with her. Now she cleaned around their empty wine glasses after they had gone home. Tiffany worked quickly, though Lucas could see pain in the way she stretched her back. She stopped beside one painting and studied it for several seconds before wiping dust from the frame. Her expression was not jealous or bitter. She looked like someone visiting a place she used to belong. When she thought no one was watching, she lifted one finger and traced a shape in the air, as though correcting the artist's line. Then a supervisor called her name from the hallway, and she lowered her hand at once. "I'm moving as fast as I can," she said, before returning to the trash. The cleaning shift ended after 10. Lucas expected Tiffany to finally go home, but she left the building carrying the same worn bag and boarded another bus. This one took her away from downtown to a neighborhood where streetlights were missing and several buildings had boards over the windows. She entered a small community center with peeling paint and a handwritten sign taped to the door. Lucas followed a few minutes later and stood in the dark hallway outside a classroom. Inside, 6 children sat around 2 folding tables covered with paper, crayons, and nearly empty paint jars. Tiffany had changed nothing except removing her janitorial shirt, yet the exhaustion in her face seemed to disappear when the children saw her. "Miss Tiff!" a little boy shouted, running to hug her. Tiffany laughed softly and bent down, even though Lucas could see the movement hurt her back. She opened her bag and took out sandwiches, juice boxes, and several small bottles of paint purchased with the money she had earned at the diner. The children rushed toward the food, but she made them wash their hands first. Then she sat among them and began teaching them how to turn mistakes into part of a picture. When one child spilled black paint across a drawing of a house, Tiffany did not throw the paper away. She added branches, turned the dark stain into a tree, and showed the child how to draw birds inside it. "A mistake can change the picture," she said, "but it doesn't have to destroy it." At the end of the table sat a 14-year-old girl with her hood pulled over her head. Lucas recognized the careful handwriting on the drawing that had fallen from Tiffany's apron. The girl, Maya, had not touched her sandwich or her blank sheet of paper. Tiffany sat beside her without asking her to remove the hood. She placed a pencil between them and waited until Maya finally picked it up. "My mom called today," the girl said. "She says rehab is helping, but she said that before." Tiffany did not offer a promise she could not keep. She simply moved the sandwich closer and said, "You don't have to believe everything will be okay tonight. You only have to make it through tonight." Maya took one bite before she began drawing. Lucas watched Tiffany move from child to child, fixing broken crayons with tape and pouring water into paint bottles to make them last longer. She praised every small effort as if each picture belonged in a museum. These children did not know that she had once been an artist with real opportunities. To them, she was simply the woman who came after working 2 jobs, brought food, and stayed until every child had somewhere safe to go. Lucas had spent 3 years believing Tiffany had chosen excitement over loyalty, yet she was spending what little money and strength she had on children who could give her nothing in return. When the lesson ended, Maya stayed behind to help clean the tables. She looked at an old canvas leaning against the wall, its surface still blank. "Is that yours?" she asked. Tiffany nodded while stacking the paint jars. "Why don't you ever paint for yourself anymore?" The question made Tiffany stop. Her eyes remained on the empty canvas as if it belonged to another life. "Because some dreams have to wait," she said. Maya frowned. "What if they get tired of waiting?" Tiffany smiled, but her eyes filled before she turned away. Then I'll apologize to them when I'm strong enough to come back. Lucas stepped back from the doorway before either of them could see him. He reached the empty hallway, pressed one hand against the wall, and tried to control his breathing. Tiffany had lost her career, her home, and nearly everyone who once stood beside her, yet she was still teaching children how to save ruined pictures. He thought about the blank canvas and the way she had looked at it. He had believed she walked away from their marriage without regret, but now he saw a woman who had placed every part of herself on hold just to survive. Lucas wiped his eyes before returning to the car. For the first time since the divorce, he did not feel like the man who had been betrayed. He felt like the man who had abandoned someone while she was drowning. As the car pulled away, he looked back at the community center and saw Tiffany turn off the classroom lights one by one. The question from the diner followed him into the darkness. If she had never stopped being the woman he loved, then who had convinced him that she was someone else? By the time Lucas returned to the penthouse, it was close to midnight. He expected the rooms to be dark, but soft jazz was playing from the speakers, and the smell of roasted chicken filled the kitchen. Chantel stood at the stove wearing one of his white shirts, the sleeves rolled above her wrists. A glass of wine had been poured for him, and his dinner was already waiting at the place he usually sat. She moved through the kitchen with the ease of someone who knew where every plate, knife, and spice belonged. For years, Lucas had accepted that comfort without question. Tonight, after seeing Tiffany work until her body could barely keep up, the scene felt less comforting and more like someone had quietly taken possession of his life. Chantel had first started visiting after the divorce. She brought food when Lucas forgot to eat, answered calls when he did not want to speak to anyone, and reminded him that ending the marriage had been the right choice. Over time, her visits became more frequent. Her shoes appeared near the door, her clothes found space inside his closets, and her perfume remained in rooms long after she left. Lucas had never invited her to move in, but he had never asked her to step back either. He had been lonely, angry, and grateful to anyone who supported the version of the past he needed to believe. Chantel had made herself useful during the exact years when he stopped asking whether her presence was appropriate. When she stepped closer to straighten his collar, Lucas moved away. The motion was small, but Chantel noticed it at once. Her smile remained, though something guarded entered her eyes. Lucas looked at the shirt she was wearing and recognized it as one Tiffany had bought during the early years of their marriage, when every purchase had required thought. He could not remember the last time he had worn it. The fact that Chantel had entered his bedroom, opened his closet, and chosen it for herself should have bothered him sooner. Instead, it took seeing Tiffany again for him to understand how much access he had allowed another woman to have. Lucas sat at the kitchen island without touching the food. He told Chantel that he had seen Tiffany, then watched the warmth leave her face for a single second. Her hand stopped over the stove before she forced herself to move again. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but the words carried a bitterness Lucas had never fully noticed before. She is still performing innocence? Lucas thought of Tiffany paying for Mr. Harris's dinner, cleaning offices after midnight, and using her own wages to feed children at the community center. She wasn't performing anything. Chantel gave a quiet, humorless smile. Pain has always been her most convincing costume. The answer troubled him more than open anger would have. Chantel did not sound disappointed that Tiffany was suffering. She sounded as if the suffering proved something she had waited years to see. Lucas explained that Tiffany worked at the diner, cleaned office buildings at night, and taught art to disadvantaged children without pay. Chantel dismissed each fact as another way Tiffany attracted sympathy. According to her, Tiffany had always known how to make people admire her, even while pretending she wanted nothing from them. Lucas listened without responding, but the more Chantel spoke, the less her words matched the woman he had followed that evening. "She did not ask me for help," Lucas said at last. "She did not need to. She only had to look broken, and you left her $1,000 tip." Lucas lifted his eyes slowly. The kitchen fell silent. Chantel turned toward the counter, but not before he saw the mistake register on her face. He had not told her how much money he left. His driver had remained outside the diner, and the bill had been hidden beneath the coffee cup until Tiffany carried it to the door. There was no reasonable way Chantel could know the exact amount. She claimed the driver had mentioned it, but Lucas knew that was impossible. When he pointed this out, she suggested that he had probably told her himself and forgotten. Her tone became light and dismissive, but her hand shook as she reached for the wine. She began stirring food in a pan, even though the stove was already off. Lucas had spent his career reading people across negotiation tables. He knew the difference between confidence and someone rushing to cover a mistake. He did not accuse her. Not yet. He simply said he was tired and left the untouched dinner behind. As he walked toward the bedroom, Chantel warned him not to let one emotional meeting pull him back into a past that had already destroyed him. Lucas paused, but did not turn around. Maybe the past was never finished, he said. Inside the bedroom, the signs of Chantel's presence became harder to ignore. Her perfume lingered near the dresser. A scarf rested across a chair. On the nightstand beside his bed was a framed photograph of Chantel and Lucas at a charity event, her hand resting on his arm as though they were a couple. Lucas had no memory of placing the picture there. He picked it up and studied the image, wondering how many small changes had happened while he was too distracted to notice. Behind the frame, the drawer had been left slightly open. Lucas pulled it out and found old receipts, business cards, and several photographs. At the bottom was a picture from his wedding day. Tiffany stood beside him in a simple white dress, laughing as rain fell across the outdoor ceremony. Lucas remembered being upset that the weather had ruined their plans. Tiffany had taken his hand and told him that imperfect days often became the stories people remembered most. The photograph had been placed face down. Lucas held it beneath the lamp. Tiffany's expression was open and full of trust, the kind of trust he had later replaced with suspicion. He looked from the wedding picture to the framed photograph of Chantel beside his bed. One woman had once built a life with him when he had nothing. The other had slowly entered that life after Tiffany was gone, using his anger to make herself necessary. Lucas had believed Chantel was helping him survive the emptiness left by his divorce. Now he wondered whether she had been doing something very different. She had not simply moved into the spaces Tiffany left behind. She had been making sure Tiffany disappeared from them. The wedding photo in Lucas's hand pulled him back to the years before success changed everything. Back then, he and Tiffany lived in a cramped apartment above a laundromat where the windows leaked cold air and the heater worked only when it felt like it. Their kitchen table had one broken leg held up by an old phone book. Tiffany graded her students' artwork there, while Lucas sat across from her, building the first version of the software that would later make him rich. They had overdue bills, an unreliable car, and almost no savings, but neither of them felt alone. Most nights, they shared instant noodles and divided one egg between two bowls. Tiffany always placed the larger half in Lucas's bowl and acted as if it happened by accident. She walked to work when the car broke down and used the bus money to buy printer paper for his business plans. When Lucas became discouraged, she listened to every unfinished idea as though it already mattered. She never asked when the money would come. She only asked what he needed to keep going. His first real chance arrived during a brutal winter. A small group of investors agreed to watch him demonstrate his prototype, but the equipment he needed cost more than they had in the bank. Lucas applied for credit, called old friends, and asked everyone he could think of for help. Every answer was no. 2 nights before the meeting, he closed his laptop and told Tiffany he would cancel because he had run out of options. The next afternoon, Tiffany visited a pawn shop across town. Inside her coat pocket was a gold bracelet her mother had given her before she died. It was not worth much to anyone else, but Tiffany had worn it on every birthday and every anniversary of her mother's passing. She stood at the counter for a long time before letting the shop owner take it. When she returned home, She handed Lucas an envelope and told him one of the investors had advanced the money. Lucas believed her because he wanted to. He bought the equipment, completed the presentation, and earned the contract that kept his company alive. He did not learn the truth about the bracelet until years later, when he saw an old photograph and asked why she no longer wore it. By then, he could have bought her anything, but he could not replace the only gift her mother had left behind. The night he signed that first contract, Lucas brought home takeout and a bottle of sparkling cider. They ate from plastic containers while the washing machines below them shook the floor. Lucas stared at the signed pages as though they were proof that their hard years were finally ending. He promised Tiffany that one day she would never have to worry about rent, food, or another broken heater. "One day, I'll build you a life with no fear in it," he told her. Tiffany reached across the table and held his hand. "I don't need a bigger life. I just need you inside the one we already have." Lucas believed he understood her. He promised that money would give them more time together, not take it away. At first, success seemed to keep that promise. They paid off their debts, moved into a better home, and replaced the car that had stranded them so many times. But the company grew faster than Lucas expected. Every new deal brought another late night, another flight, and another reason to postpone the life he said they would enjoy later. The first missed moments seemed small. He canceled dinner because a client needed him. He skipped an exhibition where Tiffany's students had prepared paintings for him to see. He forgot a weekend they had planned for months and sent flowers from another city. Each time, he apologized and promised the next deal would create more freedom. Tiffany accepted the apologies because she still remembered the man who had worked beside her at the broken table. Then, he missed her birthday. A costly bracelet arrived at the penthouse while Lucas remained in Chicago for a meeting. Tiffany left the box unopened on the dresser. Lucas thought she was being ungrateful, never realizing the gift reminded her of the bracelet she had sold when he had nothing. She did not want jewelry. She wanted the man she had sacrificed it for. Months later, Tiffany needed a medical test after weeks of pain. Lucas promised to meet her at the clinic, but another delayed flight kept him away. Chantel arrived instead, drove Tiffany home, and stayed beside her until the medicine made her sleepy. When Lucas finally returned, he apologized, but his phone rang before Tiffany could respond. He left the room to answer it, once again allowing Chantel to sit in the place where he should have been. The hardest absence came on the anniversary of Tiffany's mother's death. Every year, they had visited the cemetery together with white flowers. Lucas had gone even when they were poor and could barely afford gas. That morning, he said he only needed to finish one call before they left. The call became a meeting, and the meeting became a flight. Chantel drove Tiffany to the cemetery alone. That night, Lucas came home to find Tiffany sitting beside the window with her mother's photograph in her lap. She did not yell. She looked too tired for anger. "You remembered me when remembering cost you something," she said. "Now that you can afford everything, I feel like I'm the one thing you keep forgetting." Lucas defended himself by saying he was working for their future. Tiffany looked around the penthouse at the empty rooms and the dining table where she often ate alone. "I'm already living in that future," she told him. "You're the one who never arrived." At the time, Lucas believed she did not understand the pressure he carried. Sitting alone 3 years later, he finally understood that Tiffany had carried just as much. She had given up her mother's bracelet, her time, her celebrations, and piece after piece of herself while waiting for him to come home. Chantel had not created the loneliness in their marriage. She had simply noticed it, stepped into it, and made sure Tiffany turned to her whenever Lucas failed to show up. Lucas looked down at the wedding photograph again. He had once promised to build Tiffany a life without fear. Instead, he built a life so demanding that she slowly disappeared inside it. The gala had destroyed their marriage, but the distance had begun much earlier, and Lucas was the one who had created the space Chantel later used. The charity gala was filled with hundreds of people, yet Tiffany had never felt more alone. Lucas was in Tokyo closing another deal, and the empty seat beside her drew more attention than she wanted. She smiled for photographs, thanked donors, and answered the same questions about her husband's absence as if she had practiced the answers for weeks. From across the ballroom, Chantel watched her with a glass of champagne in each hand. When she reached Tiffany, she offered one of the glasses and promised the night did not have to feel so miserable. Chantel introduced her to Rocco near the bar. He was handsome, polite, and unusually interested in everything Tiffany said. What Tiffany did not know was that he was a struggling actor who had been paid to make her feel noticed. He laughed at the right moments, asked about her art, and spoke to her as though she were the most important person in the room. After months of being treated like a name attached to Lucas's success, that attention felt comforting. Tiffany knew it should not matter, but loneliness had made even ordinary kindness feel rare. Chantel stayed close and kept replacing Tiffany's empty glass. Tiffany barely remembered finishing the first one before another appeared in her hand. Within minutes, the music grew too loud and the lights seemed to shift above her. Her fingers began to tingle, and when she tried to place the glass on a table, she nearly missed it. Chantel told her she was only tired, but Tiffany knew the feeling was not normal. Her thoughts were slowing, and the room no longer seemed steady beneath her feet. Tiffany excused herself and entered the restroom. She locked herself inside a stall and pulled out her phone, but her hands were so numb that she dropped it twice. She opened Lucas's contact and tried to record a message before she lost the ability to think clearly. "Lucas, I know you're busy, but something is wrong with me. I can't feel my hands properly. Chantel keeps saying I'm fine, but I don't feel safe. Please call me. Please come home." She pressed send, but the weak signal inside the building caused the screen to freeze. The message appeared to fail. Tiffany tried again, but the letters blurred in front of her eyes. When Chantel knocked on the door and asked if she needed help, Tiffany wanted to say no. Instead, she opened it because Chantel was family, and family was supposed to be safe. By the time they returned to the ballroom, Tiffany could barely walk without support. Rocco saw the change in her face and immediately understood that this had gone further than he expected. He had agreed to flirt with a lonely woman and create a few suspicious photographs. He had not agreed to watch someone lose control of her own body. When Tiffany leaned against him and whispered that she wanted to go home, Rocco stepped away and told Chantel he was finished. Chantel led him into a quiet hallway where Tiffany could not hear them. Rocco said Tiffany needed medical help and threatened to leave. Chantel reminded him of the gambling debt that had already placed his younger brother in danger. She told him that if he walked away, the men looking for him would receive his brother's address before sunrise. Rocco's anger disappeared, replaced by fear. He looked back toward Tiffany, who was seated against the wall with her head resting in her hands. "She is barely conscious," he said. Chantel's voice remained calm. "Then stop thinking of her as a person and start thinking about the people you're trying to protect." Rocco hated himself for staying. He helped Chantel lift Tiffany to her feet and guide her toward the service exit. Tiffany tried to ask where they were going, but her words came out broken and unclear. Her phone slipped from her hand and landed on the carpet. Chantel picked it up, checked the screen, and saw the unfinished message to Lucas. She deleted it, cleared the recent files, and placed the phone inside Tiffany's purse. As they carried Tiffany toward the waiting car, the screen lit up once more. Neither Chantel nor Rocco noticed the small notification that appeared before fading into darkness. Voice message saved to cloud drafts. The file was damaged, incomplete, and hidden where Chantel would never think to look, but it had not disappeared. By the time Chantel and Rocco reached the penthouse, Tiffany could no longer stand on her own. Her head rested against the car window, and her breathing was slow but uneven. Rocco carried most of her weight through the service entrance, while Chantel used Tiffany's keycard to avoid the main lobby. The apartment was dark, silent, and filled with signs of a marriage that had once been real. A framed wedding photo stood near the hallway, and Lucas's coat still hung beside Tiffany's. Rocco looked at those ordinary things and understood that they were not entering an empty home. They were stepping into someone else's life to destroy it. They carried Tiffany into the bedroom and placed her on the bed she shared with Lucas. She turned weakly toward his pillow, as if her body recognized the familiar scent even while her mind was lost. Chantel removed Tiffany's shoes, loosened her dress, and pulled one strap from her shoulder. Rocco moved toward the door, saying he would not touch her any further. He had agreed to flirt with Tiffany and help create the appearance of an affair, but seeing her unconscious made the plan feel different. It no longer looked like a trick between wealthy people. It looked like a crime. Chantel did not need him to go further. She rumpled the sheets, placed his jacket near the bed, and moved Tiffany's purse to the floor. Then she instructed Rocco to lie beside her while keeping his clothes on. She adjusted his arm, turned Tiffany's face toward him, and lowered the lights until the room looked private and intimate. Through the camera, distance and darkness hid what was really happening. A man who was not touching her looked like a lover. An unconscious woman looked like someone sleeping peacefully after making a choice. Rocco stared at Tiffany's face while Chantel took the first photographs. A tear moved slowly from the corner of Tiffany's eye and disappeared into the pillow. Her lips moved, but at first he could not understand the sound. Then she whispered Lucas's name. She said it again, softer this time, like someone calling for help from a place no one else could reach. "She knows something is happening," Rocco said. Chantel checked the latest photograph and adjusted the angle. "She will remember only enough to blame herself." Rocco sat up and looked at her. "You're not breaking a marriage. You're burying a human being." Chantel's expression did not change. "Then stop pretending you weren't paid to hold the shovel." The words silenced him because they were true. Rocco had taken the money. He had allowed fear for his brother to become an excuse, and now Tiffany was crying beside him without even being awake. He lay back down, but he kept his hands away from her. Chantel took more pictures from the doorway, the foot of the bed, and the side closest to Tiffany. Each photograph suggested a different moment, even though only minutes had passed. She selected the images carefully, deleting any that showed Tiffany's limp posture or Rocco's discomfort. Once the photographs were complete, Chantel turned to Tiffany's phone. She unlocked it with a code she had watched Tiffany enter many times. For weeks, she had been preparing a false history, messages filled with complaints about Lucas, secret plans, and romantic promises to Rocco. That night, she copied the final conversations onto Tiffany's phone, took screenshots, and then deleted the messages from the device. The screenshots would show Tiffany's number and make the words appear real, while the empty phone would look like an attempt to hide an affair. She had already arranged hotel records under false names and paid a building employee to report seeing Rocco near the penthouse on several earlier nights. A former security guard had agreed to place his name in an old visitor log. Another witness, a woman who lived on Tiffany's floor, would claim she had seen Rocco leaving after midnight. Neither witness knew the full plan. They knew only that Chantel was offering more money than either of them could afford to refuse. Rocco watched her work and realized this had never been a desperate idea formed in one night. Chantel had planned every detail long before the gala. She knew which cameras were broken, which employees needed money, and which parts of Tiffany's life could be turned against her. The drug, the actor, and the photographs were only the final pieces. The lie had been built slowly enough to look like the truth. While Chantel used Tiffany's phone, Rocco reached into his coat and turned on an old device he carried for calls he did not want traced. He placed it beneath a chair with the recorder running. He did not know whether the file would ever help Tiffany, and he was too afraid to openly stop Chantel. But he needed proof that he had not imagined the coldness in her voice or the way she spoke about ruining another person as if she were organizing a business deal. Chantel told him exactly what to say if anyone questioned him. He and Tiffany had supposedly met months earlier at an art event. Their relationship had grown because Lucas was always away. Tiffany had claimed her marriage was already dead, and the gala had simply been the first time they became careless. Rocco repeated the story once, but his voice lacked confidence. Chantel reminded him that a convincing lie did not need every detail. It only needed to match what Lucas already feared. Before leaving, Rocco looked back at Tiffany. Chantel had pulled the blanket over her and cleaned the room just enough to make the scene look natural. Tiffany's face was wet with tears, and one hand remained curled around the edge of Lucas's pillow. Rocco wanted to wake her, call an ambulance, or leave the recording beside her. Instead, fear won again. He took the old phone from beneath the chair and placed it deep inside his coat. Chantel ordered him to leave through the service elevator and disappear until she contacted him. She warned that if he changed his story, his brother would suffer first. Rocco nodded and walked out without answering. Within 2 days, he left Detroit, abandoned his apartment, and stopped using his real name. Chantel believed he had vanished because he was frightened of the people he owed money. She did not know he had kept the recording. And on the old phone, hidden at the bottom of his travel bag, was Chantel's own voice, explaining how a photograph could turn an innocent woman into a liar. Lucas arrived home before sunrise with the photographs still open on his phone. He had spent the entire flight from Tokyo studying them, looking for some detail that would prove they were not what they seemed. Instead, every image fed the fear he had carried for years, the fear that Tiffany would one day realize she deserved someone better. By the time he entered the penthouse, he was no longer looking for the truth. He was looking for an explanation that matched the conclusion already forming in his mind. When he pushed open the bedroom door, Tiffany was sitting on the edge of the bed with both hands pressed against her head. She looked sick, confused, and barely awake. Her dress lay on the floor, one strap torn, and her phone was missing from the nightstand where she usually kept it. Tiffany looked at Lucas as if she could not understand why he was home. She tried to stand, but her legs gave way, forcing her back onto the mattress. Lucas saw the fear in her face and still did not ask whether she was hurt. He held the phone in front of her and demanded to know who Rocco was. Tiffany stared at the first photograph until the color left her face. She touched the screen with a shaking finger, then looked around the room as if the answer might be hidden somewhere nearby. Pieces of memory came back without order: the ballroom lights, the strange taste of champagne, Chantel holding her arm, and Rocco's face too close to hers. She remembered trying to call Lucas, but she could not remember leaving the gala or returning home. The missing hours frightened her more than the photographs. Lucas repeated his question, and Tiffany told him that Chantel had introduced Rocco that night. She said they had spoken for only a short time before she began feeling ill. Lucas asked why the photographs showed them together in the bedroom if they had just met. Tiffany had no answer. She pressed her palms against her eyes and tried to force the night back into her memory, but all she found was confusion and one painful image she could not deny. "I remember pushing against something inside my own mind," she told him. "My body was moving, but I was not choosing." Lucas's face tightened. "You expect me to separate the two?" Tiffany lowered her hands. Tears had already started moving down her cheeks. "I expected my husband to notice that I was terrified." She admitted that she remembered Rocco kissing her. The memory came in flashes, his hand near her face, the smell of his cologne, and the horrible feeling of being trapped inside a body that would not listen to her. Tiffany did not know whether she had kissed him back, but she refused to hide the possibility. Her honesty only made Lucas more certain that she had betrayed him. He heard the admission and ignored everything around it: the missing memories, her physical weakness, and the fear in her voice. Tiffany begged him to take her to a doctor and test her blood before whatever was in her system disappeared. Lucas hesitated, but his phone displayed another photograph, and anger won. He told her that blaming a drink was convenient. Tiffany stopped pleading for a moment and looked at him as though he had become someone she no longer recognized. The man who once noticed when she skipped lunch could now see her struggling to remain conscious and still believe she was performing. Lucas left the bedroom without calling a doctor. He moved into the guest room and told Tiffany they would speak when he could think clearly, but clarity never came. In the days that followed, he reviewed the photographs again and again, allowing them to deepen his anger. Chantel remained close, offering comfort and reminding him that Tiffany had already admitted kissing Rocco. Whenever Tiffany tried to explain the missing hours, Lucas heard only excuses. He did not file for divorce immediately. A part of him still loved her too much to end the marriage, but he also could not bring himself to trust her. The next 6 months became a punishment neither of them openly named. Lucas eventually returned to their bedroom, yet he slept near the edge of the mattress and never touched her. Tiffany prepared his meals, but they ate in silence. She asked for marriage counseling, medical testing, and a real investigation. Lucas refused each request because every conversation forced him to face the possibility that his first judgment had been wrong. Tiffany tried to rebuild their ordinary life through small actions. She left coffee beside his computer, replaced the buttons on his favorite coat, and waited awake when he returned late. Lucas accepted these things without warmth, as though kindness from her only made the betrayal more confusing. Some evenings, Tiffany sat across from him at dinner and quietly watched the man she loved treat her like a stranger. The silence inside the penthouse became worse than shouting because it gave her nothing to answer and no way to defend herself. Chantel visited often during those months. She comforted Tiffany when Lucas avoided her, then spoke to Lucas privately about the damage Tiffany had caused. Neither of them noticed how easily she moved between the roles of supportive cousin and loyal friend. She encouraged Tiffany to stop asking questions, claiming that Lucas only needed time. At the same time, she reminded Lucas that guilty people often became desperate when their stories started falling apart. 6 months after the gala, an envelope arrived for Lucas without a return address. Inside were screenshots of messages between Tiffany and Rocco, apparently written over several weeks. The conversations described secret hotel meetings, complaints about Lucas, and plans to continue the affair. Lucas placed the screenshots on his desk and waited until Tiffany came home. When she saw them, she did not react with the shame he expected. She looked frightened. Tiffany read each page slowly, then asked for her phone. The messages were not there. They were not in the deleted folder, her backups, or any account she knew how to access. Lucas believed their absence proved she had erased them. Tiffany saw something else. Whoever had created the screenshots had needed access to her device, her passcode, and details about her marriage. She sat at the desk long after Lucas walked away, reading the false conversations again. The words did not sound like her, but they included private details only a few people knew. Someone knew when Lucas traveled, when Tiffany felt lonely, and which hotel hosted her art events. Someone had been close enough to watch her unlock her phone and trusted enough to borrow it without raising suspicion. Only one person fit every part of that truth. Tiffany looked toward the guest room where Chantel had stayed so many nights before the gala. And for the first time, she understood that the woman comforting her might also be the reason she needed comfort. Tiffany waited until Lucas left for work before walking toward the guest room. The screenshots were still in her hand, folded so tightly that the edges had cut into her palm. Chantel had stayed in that room many times before the gala, sometimes for days at a time, always saying Tiffany should not be alone while Lucas traveled. She had borrowed Tiffany's phone to order food, answer messages, and take photographs. She knew every private detail of the marriage and had been present on the night Tiffany lost control of her own body. Tiffany had spent 6 months wondering whether she was losing her mind. Now every path led to the woman she had trusted most. Chantel was seated in front of the mirror, calmly applying makeup when Tiffany entered without knocking. She looked at the papers in Tiffany's hand and then at her face, but her expression did not change. Tiffany placed the screenshots on the dresser and asked whether she had created them. At first, Chantel acted shocked and wounded. She reminded Tiffany that they had grown up together, shared bedrooms during family visits, and held each other through funerals and heartbreak. She asked how Tiffany could accuse the one person who had stayed beside her while her marriage fell apart. Tiffany listened until Chantel reached for her phone. Then she stepped between Chantel and the door. She asked to see the messages, the payment records, and every conversation with Rocco. Chantel refused, claiming that Tiffany's grief had made her paranoid. When Tiffany reached for the phone, Chantel grabbed her wrist with surprising force. For one brief moment, the caring cousin disappeared, and something cold took her place. Tiffany slowly looked down at Chantel's hand around her wrist. "You know I didn't send those messages." Chantel released her and stood. The sadness she had been performing faded from her face. She no longer denied the accusation, but she did not confess directly either. Instead, she asked what difference the truth would make. Lucas had already seen the photographs. He had already read the messages and listened to the witnesses. Tiffany had no recording, no proof, and no clear memory of the night. All she had was a story that sounded impossible and an accusation against the woman Lucas trusted. Tiffany stared at the person she had once called her sister. Why? The question seemed to open something Chantel had kept hidden for years. She began speaking about their childhood, starting with small moments Tiffany barely remembered. A school art contest Tiffany won at 10 years old. A teacher who praised Tiffany's talent while overlooking Chantel's work. A birthday party where the boy Chantel liked spent the whole afternoon talking to Tiffany instead. Scholarships, friendships, invitations, and compliments had collected in Chantel's memory until each one became evidence that Tiffany had taken something from her. "You never stole from me with your hands," Chantel said. "You simply walked into rooms and everyone forgot I was standing there." Tiffany felt the anger inside her give way to disbelief. She had never known Chantel felt invisible. Whenever Tiffany received an opportunity, she invited Chantel with her. When she won money from an art contest, she spent part of it on a dress Chantel wanted. She introduced her to friends, promoted her business, and defended her during family arguments. Tiffany had believed sharing her happiness was an act of love. "I would have shared everything with you," she said. "That was the insult," Chantel answered. "You had so much that sharing cost you nothing." Then Chantel spoke about Lucas. She had met him first at a business event when he was still unknown and struggling. She had given him her number and believed he would call. A few days later, she introduced him to Tiffany at a coffee shop. Lucas spent the rest of that evening listening to Tiffany talk about her students and her art. He never called Chantel. Within months, he and Tiffany were in love. To Chantel, that moment became the greatest theft of all. She believed Lucas should have belonged to her because she had noticed him first. She watched him build a company, become wealthy, and give Tiffany the life Chantel believed she deserved. She stood beside them at their wedding, smiled in their photographs, and quietly resented every sign of happiness. When Lucas began traveling and Tiffany started feeling lonely, Chantel did not see a marriage in trouble. She saw an opening. Tiffany could barely recognize the woman in front of her. "You let me believe I had betrayed my own husband." Chantel's face remained calm. She said Tiffany had always received love without understanding its value. Lucas worked himself sick to build an empire, while Tiffany complained about missed dinners and empty rooms. Chantel believed she would have appreciated him better. In her mind, destroying the marriage was not cruelty. It was correcting a mistake that had lasted for years. Tiffany thought about the morning after the gala. She remembered waking frightened and sick while Chantel held her and encouraged her to apologize to Lucas. During the months that followed, Chantel had wiped away her tears while quietly pushing her to give up. Every kind word had been another part of the trap. "You watched me blame myself," Tiffany said. "You sat beside me while I wondered whether I was a terrible person." For the first time, Chantel looked uncomfortable, but the feeling passed quickly. She reminded Tiffany that Lucas had made his decision without being forced. Chantel had given him evidence, but he had chosen to believe it. He had rejected the request for a medical test, refused therapy, and ignored every question Tiffany raised. Chantel had lied, but Lucas's fear had completed the work. That was the cruelest part, because Tiffany knew it was true. Chantel had created the trap, yet Lucas had stepped into it willingly. He had trusted photographs and strangers more than the woman who had stood beside him when he owned nothing. Even if Tiffany exposed Chantel, the knowledge would not erase the moment her husband chose suspicion over concern. Chantel picked up her phone and told Tiffany to leave. She warned that if Tiffany accused her without proof, Lucas would see it as another attempt to avoid responsibility. She could even claim that Tiffany was unstable and becoming dangerous. Chantel had prepared every answer before Tiffany ever asked the first question. Tiffany collected the screenshots from the dresser. Her hands were no longer shaking. The woman who entered the room had wanted a confession she could carry to Lucas. The woman leaving understood that the truth alone would not save her. She needed evidence, and Chantel had made sure none remained within reach. At the doorway, Tiffany turned back one last time. "You may have convinced him that I betrayed him, but one day he will understand that the betrayal was standing beside him, pretending to offer comfort." Chantel smiled as if the warning meant nothing, but her fingers tightened around the phone. Tiffany walked away, knowing she had just lost the last person she thought was family. Behind the closed door, Chantel remained silent for several seconds. Then she opened a hidden folder on her phone and began deleting files. She had always believed Tiffany would be too broken to fight back. Now she was no longer certain. Tiffany signed the divorce papers at the same kitchen table where she and Lucas once planned their future. The agreement offered her part of the company, the penthouse, and enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life. She crossed out every financial claim before signing her name. She knew Lucas might see that choice as pride, but taking his money would only give him another reason to question why she had married him. She had already lost his trust. She would not leave believing she had also sold her dignity. She packed one small suitcase. The designer clothes remained in the closet, the jewelry stayed inside the safe, and the expensive bracelet Lucas had sent after missing her birthday remained unopened. Tiffany took only a chipped blue coffee mug from their first apartment and Lucas's original software notebook. Its worn pages held the ideas he had written when they were poor, hopeful, and still able to talk about everything. She had protected that notebook through every move because it reminded her of the man who once trusted her more than anyone else. Before leaving, Tiffany wrote a final letter and placed it beneath Lucas's pillow. Her wedding ring rested on top of the folded page. She did not beg him to stop the divorce or repeat the story of the gala again. She had explained the missing hours, the strange drink, and the false messages until every sentence felt empty. This time, she asked him to look at what happened around the accusation instead of looking only at her. "You asked me to prove I was innocent," she wrote. "I asked you to remember who I was. Evidence mattered more to you than memory, so there is nothing left for me to defend." Tiffany asked Lucas to consider who had gained access to his home, his trust, and his future after she was pushed out. Chantel had introduced Rocco, stayed close during the collapse of their marriage, and always appeared whenever Lucas was absent. Tiffany had no recording or witness strong enough to expose her cousin, but she wanted Lucas to understand that the person comforting him had benefited from every loss they suffered. She ended the letter without asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. Love had carried Tiffany through poverty and disappointment, but it could not survive being treated like a crime she had to disprove every day. She carried her suitcase toward the elevator and stopped once at the door. The penthouse was silent, but she could still remember their laughter in the smaller homes that came before it. She touched the pale mark beneath her wedding ring, then stepped inside the elevator. When the doors closed, Tiffany did not cry. The tears came only when she reached the street and realized she no longer had a place that felt like home. Lucas returned after dark. At first, he noticed only small things. Tiffany's shoes were gone, her art supplies had disappeared, and the hand cream beside the bathroom sink was missing. Then, he found the signed papers on the kitchen table. He walked through the penthouse calling her name, even though the stillness already told him she had left. The empty rooms felt larger than they had that morning. He found the letter beneath his pillow and read it twice. The first time, he dismissed it as Tiffany's final attempt to blame someone else. The second time, several details became harder to ignore. Chantel had introduced Rocco. She had stayed in the penthouse before the gala and somehow knew private things about his marriage. She had also become more involved in Lucas's life each time Tiffany was pushed further away. For a few minutes, Lucas allowed himself to question the story he had accepted. If Tiffany was lying, why had she refused every financial claim? Why had she left behind the wealth she was supposedly willing to betray him for? He looked at her wedding ring and remembered the woman who had sold her mother's bracelet to save his first business opportunity. That woman had believed in him when he had nothing. The idea that he might have failed to believe her now made his stomach tighten. Chantel arrived before the doubt could grow. She found Lucas sitting on the bed with the letter in his hand and quickly understood what had happened. After reading it, she told him Tiffany was trying to leave as the victim rather than face the consequences of her choices. She reminded him of the photographs, the witnesses, and Tiffany's own memory of kissing Rocco. Her voice was calm and familiar, offering Lucas an explanation that did not require him to admit he had destroyed an innocent woman. Lucas looked at the letter one last time. The questions were still there, but facing them would mean questioning every decision he had made during the past 6 months. He set the page on the nightstand and allowed Chantel to sit beside him. She held his hand until the doubt became quiet enough for him to ignore. Later that night, after Lucas fell asleep, Chantel returned to the bedroom. She picked up Tiffany's letter and wedding ring, then carried them into the guest room. Instead of destroying them, she locked both inside a small box beneath her clothes. She wanted to keep the final proof that Tiffany had left with nothing, and Lucas had still chosen not to follow her. To Lucas, the letter was the end of a failed marriage. To Chantel, it was a trophy. But hidden inside Tiffany's words was the first question that would one day bring Chantel's entire lie down. Tiffany thought leaving the penthouse would end the worst part of her pain. Instead, it only gave the story more room to spread. Within weeks, people in Detroit's social and art circles began hearing that she had carried on a secret affair while Lucas was overseas. Chantel told the story carefully, always pretending she hated to repeat it. She said she had tried to protect Tiffany, warned her, and even begged her to stop. By the time Tiffany understood what was happening, the lie had already reached the people who once knew her best. The school where Tiffany taught placed her on leave after parents began asking questions. A month later, the position was quietly terminated. The gallery that had planned her next exhibition canceled the contract, saying the attention around her name would hurt sales. Friends stopped answering calls or sent short messages saying they needed distance. Some believed the affair. Others simply did not want to be connected to a public scandal involving one of the city's most powerful businessmen. Tiffany lost her career, her reputation, and nearly every person who had once promised to stand beside her. She moved into a small apartment above a repair shop and took whatever work she could find. At the diner, she learned to smile even when customers recognized her from old photographs and whispered at their tables. At night, she cleaned offices where she sometimes saw invitations to the art events she was no longer welcome to attend. She kept her head down, worked until her hands cracked, and used every spare dollar to keep the community art program alive. The children there did not know the story people told about her. To them, she was simply Miss Tiff, the woman who brought sandwiches and never laughed at a bad drawing. 3 years after the divorce, a summer storm tore part of the roof from the community center. Water poured into the art room and ruined boxes of paper, several canvases, and most of the children's supplies. The director told Tiffany the center did not have enough money for repairs. Unless they found help quickly, the room would have to close. Tiffany stood among the wet tables while the children carried damaged drawings into the hallway. Maya held one of her paintings against her chest and asked when they could come back. Tiffany promised the room would reopen, though she had no idea how she would pay for it. That afternoon, she went to a pawn shop carrying the wedding ring she had taken back from the divorce papers before leaving the penthouse. She had kept it hidden for years, even after everything else connected to the marriage was gone. The ring was simple compared with the jewelry Lucas later bought her, but it came from the days when they still counted every dollar together. She placed it on the counter and accepted far less than it was worth. The money paid for roof repairs, new paper, and enough paint to keep the program running through the winter. When the children returned, Tiffany acted as if nothing had happened. Maya noticed the missing ring and asked about it while they cleaned brushes after class. Tiffany told her it was only jewelry and that an art room mattered more. Maya accepted the answer, but Tiffany could not look at her own hand without seeing the pale circle where the ring had been. Later that night, Tiffany locked herself inside the diner restroom. She pressed her thumb against the empty mark and tried to breathe without making a sound. Selling the ring should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like losing the last piece of a life that had once been real. She had given up the marriage, the home, and the future she planned, but some part of her had kept the ring because it remembered a time before suspicion. Now, even that was gone. Maya found her sitting on the closed toilet lid with tears running down her face. She did not ask why Tiffany was hiding or tell her to stop crying. She simply sat on the floor beside her. After a long silence, Maya asked whether someone had died. "Not exactly," Tiffany answered. "Then why does it hurt like that?" Tiffany looked at the pale mark on her finger. "Because sometimes a person survives, but the life they believed in doesn't." Maya reached up and held her hand. It was a small gesture, but it kept Tiffany from falling apart completely. She had spent years being judged by adults who believed photographs and rumors. This frightened girl, who had her own reasons not to trust anyone, asked for no proof before offering comfort. A week later, Tiffany returned home after midnight and found an envelope pushed beneath her apartment door. There was no return address. Inside was the letter she had left beneath Lucas's pillow 3 years earlier. She recognized the folds and the small tear near the bottom where her hand had shaken while writing it. Across the page, someone had written 4 words in dark red ink. "He still chose me." Tiffany stood in the narrow hallway with the letter in her hands. Only Lucas and Chantel had known where it was. For the first time in 3 years, Tiffany was no longer wondering whether Chantel had destroyed her marriage. She was wondering why Chantel was still watching her. Lucas returned to the evidence the same night he found Tiffany's wedding photo hidden beneath Chantel's picture. For 3 years, he had looked at the images as a wounded husband. Now, he opened them as the man who had built a technology company by finding patterns other people missed. He enlarged each photograph, checked the lighting, compared the angles, and studied every detail he had once been too angry to question. The first thing he noticed was Tiffany's hand. It lay beside her body without tension, too still for someone resting naturally. He moved to the next image. Tiffany's fingers had not changed position. Neither had the fold in the blanket or the shadow beneath Rocco's shoulder. The photographs appeared to show different moments, but the room had barely changed. Lucas checked the original files and found that every picture had been taken within 11 minutes. Some timestamps had been altered to make the scene look as if it had lasted through the night. He stared at Tiffany's face on the screen. Her eyes were closed, but there was no peace in her expression. A tear had dried near her temple, almost invisible in the low light. Lucas remembered how she had looked the next morning, weak, confused, and unable to stand without holding the bed. He had seen all of it and still chosen to ask who she had slept with before asking whether she had been harmed. The photographs no longer looked alive to him. They looked arranged. Rocco's arm appeared close to Tiffany in one image, but when Lucas adjusted the brightness, he saw the space between them. His body was turned toward the camera instead of toward her. Tiffany's position never changed, not even slightly. She had not been sleeping beside a lover. She had been placed there. Lucas opened the screenshots of the messages next. He read them slowly, not for meaning, but for language. Tiffany had always used short jokes when conversations became serious. She often misspelled words when typing quickly and ended difficult messages with a single heart, even when she was angry. None of those habits appeared in the supposed conversations with Rocco. The messages were too clean, too direct, and strangely formal. One message claimed Tiffany had written, "My husband does not appreciate the sacrifices I have made for our relationship." Lucas read it again and shook his head. Tiffany would never have written that sentence. She would have said something simple, probably with a joke hiding the pain. Whoever created the messages knew the problems inside their marriage, but did not know how Tiffany actually spoke. That realization hurt more than the photographs. The person behind the lie had been close enough to know when Lucas traveled, when Tiffany felt alone, and which arguments had happened behind closed doors. But they had never truly understood Tiffany. They had copied the facts of her life without capturing the woman herself. Lucas searched through the private investigator's original report. The investigator, Donald Hudson, had closed his business 6 months after the divorce and moved to Florida. Property records showed he had purchased a house in cash shortly afterward. The security guard who claimed to have seen Rocco entering the penthouse had also left Detroit and bought a home in Arizona. Another witness had paid off several large debts within weeks of giving a statement. The payments did not come directly from Chantel. They moved through small companies and temporary accounts, but Lucas had spent years following money through complicated deals. The pattern was clear. Each person who supported the affair story had received more than their work or income could explain. He contacted the building's current head of security and requested old access records. The system had been updated since the divorce, but archived logs still existed. One record showed Tiffany's keycard entering the service elevator shortly after the gala. Another showed the same card opening a restricted hallway near the parking garage. Tiffany had been too impaired to use the card herself. Lucas asked for camera footage, but most of the files were missing. One short clip had survived because it was stored under the wrong date. The image was grainy and lasted only a few seconds, yet it was enough. Chantel appeared in the service hallway supporting Tiffany on one side. Rocco held her on the other. Tiffany's head hung forward and her feet dragged across the floor. Lucas watched the clip again and again. There was no secret lover leading a willing woman home. There was a barely conscious wife being carried into her own building by the cousin she trusted. He leaned back from the computer and covered his face. Every accusation he had made returned to him. Every time Tiffany had asked him to investigate. Every moment he had treated her fear as guilt. The truth had not been impossible to find. He had simply refused to look for it. His phone rang just before dawn. The digital forensic specialist he had hired spoke carefully, explaining that the photographs had been edited, the messages could not be verified, and several timestamps had been changed. "The affair evidence is unreliable," the specialist said. "But I found something else." Lucas stood slowly. "What did you find?" "A damaged audio file attached to your former wife's cloud account. It was saved the night of the gala." Lucas gripped the phone tighter. The specialist paused before continuing. "It sounds like she was trying to reach you." Lucas listened to the recovered recording alone in his study just before sunrise. The forensic specialist had warned him that the file was damaged and that several parts were missing. At first, there was only static, distant music and the sound of someone breathing too quickly. Then, Tiffany's voice came through. It was weak, uneven, and nothing like the confident woman Lucas had accused the next morning. "Lucas, I know you're busy, but something is wrong with me. I can't feel my hands properly. Chantel keeps saying I'm fine, but I don't feel safe. Please call me. Please come home." The recording broke apart for several seconds. Lucas heard Tiffany drop the phone, struggle to pick it up, and whisper his name again. She sounded frightened, not guilty. She was trying to stay calm because she believed he would hear the message and know what to do. Then a second voice appeared in the background, clear enough to recognize. "Give me the phone, Tiff. You're embarrassing yourself." The recording ended. Lucas sat completely still. He played it again, then a third time. Each time, Tiffany's voice sounded more desperate. He pictured her alone in the restroom, unable to control her hands, calling the husband she still believed would protect her. She had reached for him before the photographs were taken, before she was carried into the penthouse and before anyone accused her of anything. The recording destroyed the story Lucas had believed for 3 years. He opened his calendar from the night of the gala. At that exact time, he had been in Tokyo preparing to speak to a room full of investors. His phone records showed a cloud notification that he had cleared without opening. He remembered seeing it while reviewing his presentation and deciding that anything personal could wait until the meeting ended. By the time he checked his phone again, Chantel had already sent the photographs. Lucas lowered his head into his hands. Tiffany had not failed to reach him. He had failed to answer. Memories returned in painful order. He saw Tiffany sitting on the bed the next morning, too weak to stand. He remembered her asking for a doctor and telling him that something had been placed in her drink. Instead of helping her, he had called the explanation convenient. He had trusted arranged photographs over the fear in her face because the photographs matched what he already believed about himself, that sooner or later someone like Tiffany would leave him. The truth was harder to face than betrayal. If Tiffany had cheated, Lucas could remain the injured husband, but if she had been drugged and framed, then he had abandoned her when she was most vulnerable. Chantel had built the lie, but Lucas had protected it every time he refused to listen. He played the recording once more. This time, he focused on the way Tiffany said, "Please come home." It was not the request of a woman hiding an affair. It was the voice of the young teacher who had once waited beside a broken kitchen table while he built his first dream. Even after years of missed dinners and empty promises, she had still believed home meant him. Lucas turned away from the computer, but there was nowhere in the penthouse he could look without seeing her. The blue coffee mug was gone. Her paintings no longer hung in the hallway. The rooms were full of expensive things and empty of the woman who had helped him build the life inside them. For 3 years, he had treated her absence as proof that he had been right. Now, he understood that leaving may have been the only way she could survive him. His phone rang an hour later. The forensic specialist had found another recovered file linked to the same investigation. It was not audio, but a deleted message sent from Rocco's old number to Chantel the morning after the gala. "Nothing happened between us. She was unconscious. I'm done helping you." Lucas read the message until the words blurred. It confirmed what the photographs had hidden. Tiffany had not spent the night with Rocco. She had been unconscious while Chantel arranged the scene around her. The specialist explained that the message had been deleted from both devices but remained inside an old service backup. Its date and sender could be verified. The phone number had once belonged to Rocco Bellini, though it had been disconnected shortly after the divorce. Lucas asked the specialist to trace every account, address, and record connected to him. The search took most of the day. Rocco had left Detroit, used different names, and spent years moving between temporary jobs. He had recently entered a rehabilitation center in Ohio for gambling addiction. The center confirmed that a man matching his identity was receiving treatment but refused to provide details without permission. Lucas called directly. He expected Rocco to refuse the conversation or demand money. Instead, there was a long silence after Lucas introduced himself. When Rocco finally spoke, his voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had spent years waiting for the past to find him. "I knew this day would come," he said. Lucas struggled to keep his anger under control. He wanted to ask what Rocco had done to Tiffany, why he had accepted Chantel's money, and why he had stayed silent while an innocent woman lost everything. But one question mattered more than the rest. "Did you touch my wife?" "Not the way those pictures made it look. She was unconscious. Nothing happened between us." Lucas closed his eyes. The answer brought relief, but the relief immediately turned into shame. Tiffany had told him the truth from the beginning. She had been forced to carry uncertainty about her own body because the people who knew what happened had allowed her to believe the worst. Rocco agreed to meet the following morning. He refused to speak to attorneys, private investigators, or anyone from Lucas's security team. He said that if Lucas arrived with people who could threaten, arrest, or silence him, the meeting would end before it began. "Come alone," Rocco said. "No lawyers, no security. If you want the truth, come as her husband, not as the billionaire who thinks he can control what happens next." Lucas looked at Tiffany's recovered message still open on the screen. For years, he had used power, money, and evidence to avoid facing his own fear. This time, none of those things could help him. He agreed to come alone. Before ending the call, Rocco spoke once more. "Lucas, the pictures aren't the worst part of what Chantel did." The line went dead before Lucas could ask what he meant. Lucas drove to Ohio before sunrise without a driver, lawyer, or security team. The rehabilitation center stood outside a small town, far from the glass buildings and private offices that defined his life. Rocco waited in a plain meeting room with 2 paper cups of coffee between them. He looked older than the man in the photographs, with tired eyes and hands that would not stay still. Lucas had imagined this meeting for hours, but when he finally sat across from him, anger made every prepared question disappear. Rocco did not try to deny anything. Chantel had hired him weeks before the gala and paid him to approach Tiffany, gain her trust, and create the appearance of an affair. He had been deep in gambling debt, and men had begun threatening his younger brother when Rocco could not pay. Chantel knew exactly how frightened he was. She promised enough money to clear part of the debt and warned that walking away would bring those men directly to his family. At first, Rocco believed the plan involved flirting, staged messages, and a few misleading photographs. He told himself Tiffany was a wealthy woman caught in an unhappy marriage and that no one would suffer beyond a public argument. That excuse disappeared the moment he saw her lose control after drinking the champagne. She could barely speak, could not stand without help, and kept asking for Lucas. Rocco wanted to call an ambulance, but Chantel threatened his brother again. "She put something in Tiffany's drink?" Lucas asked. Rocco nodded. "I don't know what it was. She told me it would make Tiffany confused, weak, and unable to remember everything clearly." Lucas gripped the edge of the table. For 3 years, Tiffany had carried fear about what might have happened to her body. He had watched that fear and treated it as proof that she was lying. Rocco quickly explained that he had not assaulted her. He had refused to undress her or touch her in any intimate way. Chantel had arranged the room, pulled down part of Tiffany's dress, positioned their bodies, and taken the photographs from angles that suggested something had happened. The answer gave Lucas a moment of relief, but it did not remove the shame. Tiffany had been innocent, yet everyone around her had allowed her to believe she might not be. Rocco had known. Chantel had known. Lucas had been the only person she trusted enough to ask for help, and he had refused to hear her. Rocco looked down at his coffee. "I kept telling myself that because I never touched her, I wasn't the monster, but I watched them destroy her name and stayed silent. Silence can ruin a life as completely as a lie." He admitted that Chantel had prepared the false messages before the gala. She used private details Tiffany had shared with her over the years and created conversations that sounded believable to anyone who did not know Tiffany well. She paid a former investigator, a building employee, and 2 witnesses to confirm meetings that never happened. After the divorce, she told Rocco to disappear and threatened his brother if he ever contacted Tiffany or Lucas. Lucas asked why Rocco had not gone to the police. Rocco did not defend himself. Fear had controlled him at first, and shame controlled him later. Every month he stayed silent made speaking harder. By the time the scandal destroyed Tiffany's career, Rocco believed a confession would only expose his own crimes without repairing the damage. He ran from city to city, gambled harder, and used alcohol to avoid the memory of Tiffany crying while unconscious. Then he removed an old phone from a cloth bag beneath the table. The screen was cracked, and the battery had to be connected to a charger, but the device still worked. Rocco opened a recording made inside the penthouse on the night of the gala. Chantel's voice filled the small room, calm and clear as she instructed him where to lie, how to position his arm, and what story to repeat if anyone questioned him. In the background, Tiffany whispered Lucas's name. Lucas stopped the recording. For several seconds, he could not speak. Hearing Tiffany's frightened voice in the cloud message had broken something inside him. Hearing her call for him again while Chantel arranged the photographs left him with no place to hide from what he had done. He had not created the trap, but his insecurity had made him easy to control. Chantel had only needed to place the evidence in front of him and wait for fear to finish the job. Rocco placed the phone in Lucas's hand. It contained the original recording, messages from Chantel, payment details, and a photograph of the hotel room where she planned the setup. He had kept everything because some part of him always expected Chantel to turn against him. What began as protection for himself had become the only complete record of Tiffany's innocence. Rocco did not ask Lucas to forgive him or help reduce the charges he might face. He knew a confession did not erase 3 years of suffering. He asked for only one thing. "Tell Tiffany before you release any of this," he said. "She has spent years not knowing what happened to her. She shouldn't hear the worst parts from a reporter or a courtroom." Lucas looked at the old phone in his hands. Rocco, the man he had hated for 3 years, had shown more concern for Tiffany in that moment than Lucas had shown on the morning she begged him for help. The realization was painful, but he accepted it. "I'll tell her," Lucas said. "She will hear the truth from me first." Rocco nodded, though neither man pretended that promise made Lucas honorable. The honorable moment had passed years earlier. All that remained was the chance to stop causing more harm. Lucas left the center before dawn and drove back toward Detroit. The old phone sat on the passenger seat beside him. Every few miles, he looked at it and remembered Tiffany's final letter. She had asked him to consider who gained access to his home and future after she was removed. The answer had been in front of him for years, wearing concern like a costume. The sun was rising when Lucas entered the penthouse. He expected the apartment to be empty, but the smell of coffee and breakfast drifted from the kitchen. Chantel stood at the stove with her back to him, humming softly as though nothing in the world had changed. She was wearing Tiffany's old silk robe. Lucas stopped in the doorway, one hand still wrapped around Rocco's phone. Chantel turned with a warm smile and began telling him she had made his favorite breakfast. He looked at the robe, the kitchen she treated as her own, and the woman who had built a home inside the ruins of his marriage. For the first time, Lucas did not see a friend who had supported him through betrayal. He saw the person who had created it. Lucas entered the kitchen without revealing the phone in his hand. Chantel smiled as she placed a plate of eggs and toast on the counter, still wearing Tiffany's old silk robe. She spoke about breakfast, his schedule, and the meetings he had that afternoon, as if she had always belonged there. Lucas set his own phone beside the fruit bowl with the recorder running. Then he sat down and forced himself to look calm. For the first time in 3 years, he needed Chantel to believe he trusted her. He asked about the night of the gala. Chantel's hands paused for a moment before she continued pouring coffee. She repeated the same story Lucas had heard many times. Tiffany drank too much, ignored every warning, and brought Rocco back to the penthouse. Chantel claimed she had tried to protect both of them, but Tiffany had been determined to destroy her marriage. Her voice carried the confidence of someone who had told the lie so often that it no longer felt like a lie. Lucas asked why she had used the service entrance that night. Chantel looked up sharply, then laughed and said she had wanted to protect Tiffany from being seen. He asked why the photographs had been taken within minutes, even though Chantel had always described a scene she discovered by accident. The smile on her face weakened. She suggested Lucas was confused and warned him not to reopen old wounds because of one emotional meeting with Tiffany. Lucas let the silence grow. Chantel moved closer and placed her hand over his. She told him Tiffany had always known how to create doubt and make other people carry her guilt. Lucas looked down at the hand touching him and remembered Tiffany's cracked fingers at the diner. One woman had worked until her skin broke. The other had lived comfortably inside the life built from that suffering. He removed his hand and played the recovered voice recording. Static filled the kitchen before Tiffany's frightened voice came through. She struggled to speak, told Lucas that she could not feel her hands, and begged him to call because she did not feel safe. Then Chantel's own voice appeared in the background. "Give me the phone, Tiff. You're embarrassing yourself." The color left Chantel's face. She stared at the phone as the recording ended, then quickly said Tiffany had been drunk and confused. She claimed she took the phone only because Tiffany was making a scene. Lucas said nothing. He opened the security footage next. On the screen, Chantel and Rocco carried Tiffany through the service hallway. Tiffany's head hung forward and her feet dragged along the floor. She was not walking beside a lover. She was barely conscious. Chantel watched the footage without blinking, but her breathing changed. Lucas placed Rocco's old phone on the counter. He played the recording from the bedroom. Chantel's voice instructed Rocco where to lie, how to position his body, and what story to tell later. In the background, Tiffany cried and whispered Lucas's name. Chantel stepped backward. Her first expression was fear, but it quickly became anger. She accused Rocco of lying to protect himself and said any recording could be altered. Lucas showed her the payment records, the false hotel entries, the messages sent from Tiffany's phone, and the money transferred to the investigator and witnesses. Each piece removed another place for her to hide. "How long?" Lucas asked. "How long were you planning to take her life?" Chantel stopped denying it. She pulled the robe tighter around herself and said Tiffany had never deserved what Lucas gave her. Tiffany complained about empty dinners and missed dates while Lucas was building an empire. Chantel claimed she would have understood the pressure, supported every trip, and appreciated every part of the life Tiffany took for granted. The bitterness she had hidden for years finally came out without restraint. She spoke about meeting Lucas first and watching him choose Tiffany. She described every childhood moment when people praised Tiffany and ignored her. In Chantel's mind, the marriage, the penthouse, and Lucas's success were things stolen from her. She believed she had only taken back the future that should have been hers. Lucas finally understood that Chantel had never loved him as a person. She loved what standing beside him represented. She wanted Tiffany's home, her position, and the proof that she had finally been chosen over the woman she envied. "You didn't want my heart," Lucas told her. "You wanted to stand where Tiffany once stood." Chantel's eyes filled, but the tears did not soften her anger. "I stayed when she left." "She did not leave me," Lucas said. "I drove her away, and you made sure I was blind while doing it." The words silenced the room. Lucas saw the full truth then. Chantel had drugged Tiffany, built the false evidence, and paid people to support the lie. But she had not forced Lucas to reject medical testing or refuse an investigation. She had used the fear already inside him. His belief that Tiffany would eventually leave made him willing to accept anything that confirmed it. Chantel moved toward him and tried one last time to recover control. She said they could destroy the evidence, pay Rocco to disappear again, and protect the company from scandal. No one needed to know. Tiffany already had a new life, and telling the truth would only reopen her wounds. Chantel spoke as if they were partners solving a business problem. Lucas looked at the woman wearing Tiffany's robe and felt nothing but disgust. "You still think this is about protecting me?" "It can be," she said. "We can survive this together." "There is no we. There never was." Lucas reached for his phone and ended the recording. Then he told Chantel the police were already on their way. She looked toward the door and finally understood why he had kept her talking. Panic replaced her confidence. She grabbed Rocco's phone from the counter, but Lucas took it back before she could damage it. The police arrived minutes later with investigators who had already received copies of the evidence. Chantel shouted that Lucas was choosing Tiffany again and throwing away the only person who had stayed beside him. She struggled as the officers placed her in handcuffs, still insisting she had done everything because she loved him. At the elevator, Chantel turned toward Lucas. Her face had become calm again, but the calm was colder than her anger. "Truth may clear her name, Lucas," she said. "It will not make her trust you again." The elevator doors closed between them. Lucas remained in the kitchen after the police left. Breakfast sat untouched on the counter, and Tiffany's old robe had fallen to the floor during the arrest. For years, Lucas had imagined that discovering the truth would bring relief. Instead, the penthouse felt heavier than before. Chantel was gone. Tiffany was innocent. The evidence was finally clear. But none of it changed the fact that Tiffany had begged him to believe her, and he had chosen fear. Lucas picked up the damaged phone containing her voice and understood that proving her innocence would be the easy part. The harder part would be facing the woman whose life he had helped destroy. By noon, Lucas's legal and public relations teams had filled the conference room. They advised him to release a short statement, describe Chantel as a trusted person who had deceived everyone, and avoid discussing his own mistakes. One executive warned that admitting too much could damage the company, invite lawsuits, and weaken several major deals. Another suggested offering Tiffany a private settlement before the story reached the news. Lucas listened until they finished, then closed the folder in front of him. For 3 years, Tiffany had suffered in public while everyone around him protected his reputation. He would not hide behind careful language now that the truth threatened him instead. Lucas told the team that the full evidence would be given to the police and Tiffany's attorney. His statement would not call the situation a misunderstanding or claim that he had been fooled like everyone else. Chantel had created the conspiracy, but Lucas had refused a medical test, ignored Tiffany's fear, and treated her requests for an investigation as excuses. Those choices belonged to him. When the company's attorney reminded him that public admissions could be used against him, Lucas answered that consequences were not the same as unfair treatment. Tiffany had lived with consequences she did not deserve. He would not complain about facing the ones he had earned. Before speaking publicly, Lucas arranged for Tiffany to receive the share of the marital assets she had refused during the divorce. The transfer included property, investment income, and compensation for the years in which the false accusations damaged her teaching and art career. An independent legal team calculated the amount so Lucas could not reduce it or attach personal conditions. The documents made clear that Tiffany owed him no meeting, forgiveness, or future relationship in return. It was not a gift and not an attempt to rescue her. It was property and opportunity that should never have been taken from her. Lucas also stepped away from the daily leadership of his company. The board resisted at first, but he explained that a man who had ignored evidence in his own home could not pretend the scandal had nothing to do with his judgment. He entered therapy without telling reporters and began meeting with experts who worked with victims of manipulated photographs, false messages, and digital harassment. Using his own money, he created an independent support fund for people who could not afford forensic reviews or legal help. His name appeared nowhere in the organization. For the first time in years, Lucas did something without turning it into part of his public image. The statement was recorded in a plain room without company logos or dramatic lighting. Lucas wore a simple dark suit and spoke without notes. He explained that the evidence against Tiffany had been fabricated and that several people had been paid to support the lie. He named Chantel's role, but did not use her actions to excuse his own. His voice remained steady until he reached Tiffany's name. Tiffany Campbell did not fail our marriage. She was harmed by a conspiracy and then harmed again by a husband who trusted his fear more than her character. Clearing her name is not an act of generosity. It is the smallest part of the debt I owe. Lucas admitted that Tiffany had asked for help before the photographs were taken. She had tried to contact him because she believed her drink had been altered, and he failed to answer. The next morning, he saw her confusion and fear, but chose accusation over concern. He told the public that Tiffany had never been responsible for the scandal that destroyed her career and reputation. Anyone who repeated the affair story had repeated a lie. The statement spread within minutes. News outlets replayed his words, former friends posted apologies, and people who had avoided Tiffany suddenly began praising her strength. Lucas refused interview requests and did not contact her. He knew public support could not erase the years when she had gone to work beneath strangers' judgment. The truth might repair her name, but it could not return the jobs, friendships, or nights she had lost. At the community center, Tiffany stood near the back of the art room while the statement played on an old television. Several children were painting at the tables, unaware of why the adults had become silent. Maya stood beside Tiffany and watched Lucas admit that he had failed her. Tiffany did not cry when he described the conspiracy or when he said the affair had never happened. She had known she was innocent for 3 years. Hearing the truth spoken publicly did not feel like victory. It felt like someone finally unlocking a door after she had already learned to live inside the room. Then Lucas said her name. Tiffany's fingers tightened around the edge of a chair. Maya quietly reached for her hand and held it without asking a question. Tiffany looked down at the girl, then back at the screen. Lucas was not asking her to return. He was not promising that money or public shame had changed him. For once, he was simply telling the truth and accepting what it would cost. The statement ended, but no one in the room moved. Tiffany stared at the dark screen while Maya kept holding her hand. Lucas had finally given her back her name. Now, he would have to face the fact that her heart was no longer his to ask for. Lucas waited until the community center had closed before going inside. The children were gone, the tables had been wiped clean, and unfinished paintings rested along the walls to dry. Tiffany stood near the supply cabinet counting brushes when she noticed him at the door. He carried no flowers, expensive gifts, or promises about the future. In one hand was a folder containing the forensic reports, payment records, and security footage. In the other was the damaged phone that held the recording she had tried to send on the night of the gala. Tiffany did not invite him closer. She simply looked at the folder and asked why he had come when the public statement had already cleared her name. Lucas placed the evidence on the nearest table, but kept the phone in his hand. He told her that the public deserved to know she was innocent, but she deserved to know exactly what had happened to her. The words were difficult to say because he understood that every answer would also reveal another way he had failed her. "I came to return the truth to you," Lucas said. "I am not here to ask for your heart." Tiffany's expression did not soften. She had spent too many years waiting for one honest sentence from him to be moved simply because it had finally arrived. Lucas explained that Chantel had drugged her drink, paid Rocco to approach her, and staged the photographs after she lost consciousness. The messages, hotel records, and witnesses had all been created to support the same lie. Rocco had confessed and provided a recording that confirmed nothing intimate had happened between them. Tiffany listened without moving. She had imagined hearing those words for 3 years, often during the nights when she could not sleep because she did not trust her own memory. She thought certainty would bring relief. Instead, she felt the room becoming smaller around her. Lucas offered her the phone and told her it contained the message she had tried to send from the gala restroom. The recording began with static and distant music. Then Tiffany heard her own voice, weak and frightened, asking Lucas to call because something was wrong. She heard herself say that she could not feel her hands and did not feel safe with Chantel. Near the end, Chantel ordered her to hand over the phone, and the file stopped. Tiffany played it again, pressing the speaker closer as if the woman in the recording might say something different the second time. She did not. The final doubt she had carried for 3 years disappeared. Tiffany had not chosen Rocco, hidden an affair, or destroyed her marriage during a moment of weakness. She had recognized danger, tried to reach her husband, and trusted the wrong person to help her. The truth should have set her free, but instead it forced her to see how completely she had been abandoned. Tiffany lowered the phone and covered her mouth. Her knees weakened, and she sat on one of the children's small chairs before she fell. Lucas moved toward her, then stopped himself. He had no right to touch her simply because she was hurting. Tiffany bent forward and began to cry, not quietly or carefully, but with the grief of someone mourning a person no one else had known was dying. For years, she had punished the woman she had been that night. She had wondered whether loneliness had made her unfaithful, whether she had secretly wanted Rocco's attention, and whether her missing memories were protecting her from something terrible she had chosen. She had apologized to Lucas for a betrayal that never happened and allowed strangers to treat her as guilty because part of her believed they might be right. Now she knew the truth, but she could not return those years to the woman who had spent them hating herself. Lucas stood several feet away and let her cry. Every instinct told him to explain that he had also been manipulated, but he knew those words would only protect him. Chantel had created the evidence, yet Lucas had chosen what to do with it. He had refused medical help, rejected an investigation, and treated Tiffany's fear as an inconvenience. No lie had forced him to become cruel. When Tiffany finally looked up, her face was wet and exhausted. "You found the truth after I learned how to live without being believed." "I know." "Do you?" she asked. "Because you lost a wife. I lost the right to trust my own memory." Lucas accepted the words without correcting her. Tiffany told him that for years she had been afraid of her own thoughts, her own body, and every blank space in that night. When people called her a liar, she had no evidence strong enough to defend herself. The man who knew her best had looked at her terror and decided it was an act. Publicly clearing her name could not erase what that had done. Lucas admitted that he had believed the evidence because it matched his deepest fear. He had always expected Tiffany to realize he was not enough for her. When the photographs arrived, he used them to confirm what he already believed about himself. His insecurity had mattered more to him than her character. He did not ask her to understand or forgive that failure. "I loved you before you had anything," Tiffany said. "You were the one who decided that couldn't be enough." Lucas lowered his eyes. There was nothing he could say without making the moment about his pain. He told her that the evidence belonged to her and that she could decide how much became public. The financial transfers were also hers by right, whether she accepted them or never spoke to him again. Then he turned toward the door. Before he reached it, Tiffany asked him to wait. She went to a locked cabinet and removed the old software notebook she had taken from the penthouse. Its cover was worn, and several pages had been repaired with tape. She placed it in his hands without explaining why she had protected it through years of poverty, scandal, and anger. "You should have this," she said. "It belongs to the person you were trying to become." Lucas opened the notebook after she stepped away. The pages held his earliest designs, impossible plans, and calculations written before anyone else believed in him. Tiffany had added small notes in the margins, correcting his spelling, reminding him to eat, and encouraging ideas he had nearly abandoned. Beside an unfinished design near the back, she had written one final sentence years earlier. "He will change the world. I only hope the world does not change him first." Lucas stared at the words until he could no longer see the page clearly. Tiffany had recognized the danger long before either of them understood it. Success had not made him cruel by itself, but it had given his fear more places to hide. He closed the notebook and thanked her, knowing the words were too small for what she had returned. Lucas left the community center believing their story had ended. He had finally brought Tiffany the truth, but it had arrived after she had built a life that no longer depended on him. Outside, he walked alone toward his car, carrying the notebook against his chest. From the second-floor window, Tiffany watched him cross the empty parking lot. Her hand rested against the glass as he opened the car door and looked back once. She did not call him, but she remained at the window until his car disappeared. Months later, Tiffany stood in a crowded courtroom and faced the woman she had once called her sister. Chantel sat beside her attorney in a plain gray suit, without the confidence that had carried her through years of lies. The evidence against her included Rocco's recording, payment records, security footage, and the files recovered from Tiffany's phone. There was no longer any question about what she had done. Still, when Tiffany walked toward the witness stand, her hands trembled, not because she feared Chantel, but because part of her still remembered the girl who had shared childhood bedrooms, family holidays, and secrets late at night. Tiffany spoke about losing her marriage, her teaching position, her art career, and the friends who disappeared when her name became dangerous. She described working until her hands cracked and waking each morning unsure whether she could trust her own memory. But the deepest pain had not come from strangers who judged her. It came from learning that Chantel had spent years standing beside her while quietly wishing for her life to fall apart. Tiffany looked directly at her cousin before giving the court her final statement. "I will not ask the court to punish you because I hate you," she said. "I will ask the court to protect others from the part of you that decided love was something you could steal by destroying its owner." For the first time since the investigation began, Chantel stopped trying to defend herself. She admitted hiring Rocco, altering Tiffany's drink, creating false messages, and paying witnesses. Her apology was quiet and incomplete. She blamed envy, loneliness, and years of feeling second best, but Tiffany understood that pain did not excuse choice. She did not offer forgiveness. Still, hearing the confession gave her something she had not possessed for years, an ending that no longer depended on anyone believing her. After the trial, Tiffany returned to painting. At first, she could work for only a few minutes before old memories made her stop. Maya often sat nearby doing homework without speaking, giving Tiffany the same kind of quiet company Tiffany had once offered her. Over time, the blank canvases began to fill. A year after Lucas publicly cleared her name, Tiffany opened an exhibition called Unbroken Memory. Every painting showed a person trying to rebuild something that could not return to its original form. The central piece showed a woman standing alone in heavy rain, holding a small flame between both hands. The storm bent the trees and darkened the sky, but the flame remained alive. A collector offered more money for the painting than Tiffany had earned during all 3 years of working at the diner. She accepted the sale, then donated the money to the community center. The painting itself remained there, hanging above the children's art tables where the roof had once leaked. Lucas attended the exhibition, but stayed near the back of the room. He had continued therapy, reduced his work schedule, and followed every boundary Tiffany set. He never appeared at the community center without permission, and never used donations to create a reason for contact. The company continued without his constant control, proving that many of the sacrifices he once called necessary had actually been choices. Tiffany noticed him across the gallery, but neither of them approached the other. Maya eventually walked over to him. She was taller now, more confident, and no longer hid beneath her hood. Lucas told her that Tiffany's paintings were beautiful. Maya studied him for a moment before answering. "Miss Tiff says apologies are words. Change is what those words do after everyone stops listening." Lucas nodded. "She's right." He left the exhibition without asking Tiffany for anything. That mattered to her more than flowers, gifts, or another public apology would have. For the first time, she saw him accept that change did not guarantee a reward. He was becoming different because it was right, not because it would bring her back. Several weeks later, Tiffany invited him to the small coffee shop where they had first met. They sat at a table near the window with no lawyers, cameras, or carefully prepared statements between them. Tiffany spoke honestly about how lonely she had felt before the gala, and how often she had hidden that loneliness because she did not want to stand in the way of his success. Lucas admitted that work had become the place where he escaped every fear he did not know how to face. Chantel had exploited their distance, but she had not created all of it. "I cannot return to the marriage we had," Tiffany said. "I'm not asking you to." "Then what are you asking for?" "The chance to become someone you would choose with open eyes." Tiffany did not forgive him that day. She offered only another cup of coffee the following week. That became a third conversation, then several months of careful contact. They attended individual therapy and later entered counseling together. Lucas learned to listen without defending himself. Tiffany learned to speak before loneliness became silence. They worked beside each other at the community center, but Lucas never tried to manage it or replace Tiffany's decisions with his own. Their second relationship was slower than the first. They did not rely on old memories to prove they belonged together. They created new habits instead. Lucas kept promises even when no one praised him for it. Tiffany stopped saying she was fine when she was not. They argued, took space, returned, and spoke honestly. By the end of the year, they were not trying to repair the people they had once been. They were falling in love as people who finally understood what trust required. 2 years after the trial, Lucas and Tiffany married again inside the repaired community art room. The children decorated the walls with paper flowers, and Maya walked Tiffany down the short aisle. There were no reporters, company executives, or expensive decorations. Mr. Harris from the diner sat in the front row, holding the same careful smile Tiffany remembered from years earlier. Their wedding bands were simple. After Tiffany's story became public, the pawnshop owner had recognized her ring and admitted he had never sold it. He had kept it because something about the way she gave it up had stayed with him. The metal was divided and reshaped into 2 plain bands, each carrying a small piece of the life Lucas and Tiffany had lost. After the ceremony, Lucas placed a $5 bill beside Tiffany's coffee cup. She looked at it and smiled. "No enormous tip this time? I finally learned to pay only what I owe." "And what do you owe me?" "The truth, every day, especially when fear would be easier." Tiffany placed the bill back into his hand. "This cup is free, not because I need anything from you, but because today I choose to give." A year later, they opened Second Light, a permanent art school for children who had lost homes, families, reputations, or faith in themselves. Tiffany directed the school, while Lucas handled repairs, carried boxes, and followed her instructions. Maya became its first student assistant. On the entrance wall, beneath the painting of the woman protecting the flame, Tiffany placed one sentence: "Being broken is not the end of your story. Sometimes it is the first moment the light can enter."